From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson here. Here's what's coming up out of Oklahoma State University. Derrell will provide this week's observations on the cattle markets. He will comment on the bearish numbers out of that USDA cattle on feed report last Friday. And Derrell will talk about several market disruptions resulting from the ongoing drought. Then Jeff Wickman visits with K-State's Kevin Herbel of the Kansas Farm Management Association. Kevin will offer end-of-year tax management advice for you farmers and ranchers and positioning oneself to make better tax management decisions to finish out the year. And later, Jeff will tell us about a quite unique 4-H Science of Agriculture Challenge project on this week's 4-H segment. All that and more next on Agriculture Today.
A social distancing tip.
While the CDC urges you to avoid close contact, like hugging or shaking hands, there are other non-physical ways to say hello. Wave, wink, use sign language, salute, smile, give the peace sign, throw up an air high five, do jazz hands. Remember, stay a minimum of 6 feet or 2 arms length away from others and stay home if you can. For more info, visit coronavirus.gov.
Let's all do our part because we're all #alone together. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
This is Agriculture Today from the campus of Kansas State University, and welcome to you. For our weekly cattle market insight now, though, we head down to Stillwater, Oklahoma, and tap the thoughts of our guest, livestock economist from Oklahoma State University, Derrell. Well, we've a cattle on feed report out of the USDA to gnaw on today, Derrell, which we'll do in just a second. But as we look back at last week's trading, one of the standout developments there was the price pressure brought to bear by the corn market. You might speak to that if you would.
You know, the number of things have impacted cattle markets in general in the last 2 or 3 weeks. A lot of pressures developed. Certainly, the fairly remarkable harvest time rally in grain markets has added to that pressure. So we've seen fed cattle prices under some pressure and back up a little bit in the last couple of weeks. And that's part of a bigger picture of some pressure across the board on both the demand and the supply sides.
But there are other things going on, of course. Do we see anything developing on the slaughter side that may be leaning on prices as well?
Well, we continue to see slaughter running, a little bit above a year ago. Beef production here in the last half of the year generally, on an average basis is above a year ago. So there's plenty of supplies. Obviously, in total, we've got large meat supplies with lots of pork and poultry as well as beef in the marketplace. So that's one of the factors to keep an eye on as well.
To that cattle on feed report out Friday from the USDA, the thing that jumps off the page, once again, a record high October the 1st cattle inventory here.
That's right. The October report showed placements in September were up surprisingly bigger than expected at about 105.9% of last year. The marketings were also big, 106.2% of last year. There was one extra business day this September compared to last year. So the average daily marketings for this month come in just about 1% above a year ago on a daily average basis, but there was that extra day. And all of that leads to an October 1st on-feed total, 103.8% of last year. And as you noted, that's a record for this date for the data series, which goes back to 1996.
So when you consider that, what do you think is the general market upshot of those numbers as we look ahead?
Well, clearly we've got lots of cattle to deal with in the next few months. And again, it's kind of a timing issue as much as anything. I think it's important to keep a little bit longer-term perspective. We've had 3 months in a row of large placements, so we have built up these feedlot inventories for this time of the year. We won't continue to do this, and so we're going to work on these supplies here as we go through the winter. But it means that we have plenty of cattle, and certainly we're going to continue to have plenty of marketing challenges to stay current through this process. I think we're actually going into it in relatively good shape in terms of the currentness, if you will, of feedlots. Carcass weights are big, but I don't think they're big because cattle are behind in marketings. I think they're just big because cattle have done very well, and the genetics we have today allows those cattle to be big.
Derrell, asking you to look into your crystal ball a bit here. We've seen these feedlot inventory numbers pretty substantial of late. Do you foresee a point, probably into 2021, but a point at which those inventories start to turn to the lower side?
I think so. Again, if you look at the longer term or the broader cattle cycle kinds of indications, cattle inventories actually peaked in 2019, which means we came into 2020 with kind of the largest or the peak pipeline, if you will, of feeder cattle. And, of course, we've had all kinds of timing disruptions in 2020. And so we're sort of working through that right now. But as we go into 2021, again, as we work through this current large feedlot inventory that we have, behind that, we're going to generally see some tightening. Now, not a dramatic tightening of numbers, but over time, these numbers are going to get a little bit smaller as we move into 2021.
Well, to the more immediate, and looking at our recent weather, droughty conditions in Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas, a large part of the Central Plains, the current storm rolling through notwithstanding, the impacts on wheat pasture availability have been rather stark, have they not? Quite limited opportunities there, up to now anyway.
That's right. Over the fall, our winter wheat grazing prospects have really changed dramatically in the last 2 or 3 weeks. We have a lot of wheat get planted and actually get up in many cases, but with no moisture to follow that, conditions have deteriorated, and so we've seen a lack of demand for stocker cattle. That has weighed on these feeder cattle markets. Now, we are getting some moisture now in this winter storm. We'll see how that plays out. That may help kind of bring back some of those prospects, but all in all, it's been a very challenging fall, and we have not really been able to see the stocker prospects develop like they looked a little bit earlier, about 6 weeks ago.
It would really take a dramatic turn in the conditions of those wheat stands to truly make stocker cattle demand for wheat pasturing. Is that fair to say?
Well, I think so. It may depend on how the weather plays out from this point forward. If we get some moisture, that's the first key. And this is some moisture. We don't quite know how much the totals are going to be, but it's going to depend on the temperatures and other things that follow this in terms of whether that can translate into significant forage growth here in the next month or so, which is what would have to happen in order to have enough forage to be able to graze through the winter. So, it's going to be a challenge there. The other thing that affects our stocker grazing budgets this fall is the fact that we have seen such I'm going to call it a meltdown in the cattle futures complex, both live cattle and feeder cattle. And so those budgets just simply don't look as attractive now. So even if we have wheat pasture, I think producers are going to take a careful pencil to look at what the prospects really are, unless they already had something that they had, laid in terms of hedging opportunities that did exist maybe a month ago now.
Yeah, might be worth a re-examination or at least close scrutiny on those plans if things do change. But this is all part of an overall picture concerning forage supplies heading into the late fall and winter. Because of the dryness in the latter part of the summer in particular, those supplies may well be limited, and the availability of adequate forage to last the winter, well, how much of an issue is that?
Well, I think it's certainly an issue. It obviously is an issue for certain individual operations, and in some regions more so than others. But I think a lot of producers, and particularly with this kind of early winter storm that has surprised us a bit, will really kind of have a wake-up call to sort of evaluate what those forage supplies are, where they stand going into the winter. And so, we've probably seen some impacts already in both feeder cattle markets, with cattle having to be marketed that maybe would have stayed out in the country. We're probably seeing a little bit of additional cull cow marketings. It's the time of year when we do a lot of that, but the dry conditions and lack of forage is probably adding to that. And for producers that maybe have not fully made all of those decisions, this winter storm serves as a reminder that we really need to sort of take stock of where we are with our forage supplies and our ability to get through the winter. We're not going to grow a lot of additional forage at this point, so whatever you've got is kind of what you have to work with.
Let's finish, if we might, on the latest on the beef demand side. We are now steadily easing into the holiday period. And what are you reading as far as the latest signals on demand?
Well, there's two sort of perspectives here. One is that in general, through this whole thing of the uniqueness that is 2020, beef demand has actually stayed pretty strong. And so I think we're still, in one sense, in a pretty strong position. Now, if you look more recently, We have seen some weakness in box beef prices. I'm a little concerned, perhaps more so going into the winter here, going forward, because a couple of things. One is that obviously we don't have any more stimulus coming out with all of the political challenges we've had. So, we're going to see some additional impacts from the level of unemployment and, overall income situation that a lot of folks face. The other part of it is as we go into the winter, we see a different kind of beef demand, if you will. We typically, this is the time of year when sort of the restaurant demand kind of takes center stage, holiday functions, all of those things. We think about prime rib demand going into Christmas and New Year's, and again, wintertime restaurant demand. And those things will be more limited this year because of where we stand currently with COVID-19 and the overall macro situation. So I'm watching it carefully. I'm concerned. So far, we haven't seen major weakness, although we have seen some weakness in overall box beef cutout values in the past 2 or 3 weeks.
So in other words, it could be worse.
Well, unfortunately, I continue to be worried. I guess that's kind of what economists do. We sort of worry about the worst prospects, and to some extent, we haven't seen some of those concerns develop recently, so it's kind of so far so good. But the concerns are still there, and I think we do have to kind of keep an eye on things going forward.
Very well. And won't let you go without asking you where you think the markets are headed this week. Any sense of that right now?
Well, again, we've seen some weakness lately. I think this market is struggling to kind of, get some footing here. Again, we've had a lot of factors in the last couple of weeks that have really started to weigh on the market with the feed market impacts. We've seen the weakness on the box beef market that we just alluded to. We've seen the challenges with, dry conditions and cattle having to move to town. And so all of those factors. And then we've got this cattle on feed report, which will probably be viewed as at least near term, somewhat bearish. I think all of those are things that are going to continue to weigh on the market a little bit going forward.
Always appreciate your take on these markets, Derrell. Many thanks. We'll catch up with you again quite soon.
You're very welcome.
He's a livestock economist at Oklahoma State University, Derrell Peel, along with us regularly to talk the cattle market trends here on Agriculture Today.
What is radon? Home exposure to radon gas is the leading cause of lung cancer death in the United States for non-smokers. In Kansas, 1 in 4 homes will test at or above the EPA action level. The Surgeon General recommends all homes be tested and fixed if necessary. Visit kansasradonprogram.org for more information. Test, fix, save a life. This message brought to you by the Kansas Radon Program, the Kansas Association of Broadcasters, and this station.
This is Agriculture Today. I'm Jeff Wickman. When it comes to year-end tax management, Kevin Herbel, Executive Director of the Kansas Farm Management Association, says that farmers and ranchers should start gathering up their records now. He says this gives them an opportunity to know and understand their situation and to make the best decisions for their operation before the end of the year. Kevin, as we look at end-of-year tax management, one of the things you're telling me that is most important is to know your own situation.
That's correct, Jeff. There's a lot of information that producers might be seeing, whether it's in a farm magazine or hearing on a radio station somewhere or whatever it might be. But planning for end of year is a activity that needs to be very specific to that farm situation. So making sure they have their records up to date, that they have their own information there as they begin to look at making these year-end planning decisions.
And part of that means knowing exactly what has come in, what loans, what payments have come in, because there are some things that may have happened early in the year that might slip your mind.
There are within that some things this year that are quite different. We have had a lot of different forms of government payments that have came out early in the year, and many of us have kind of forgotten about MFP again by this point with different things that have occurred throughout the year. But the final portion of their 2019 MFP payment did come in back in early 2020 and will be taxable income for this year. There's been a couple different rounds of CFAP payments that many farms have received. In some situations, if there were 2018 and 2019 losses, there may be FSA program payments through the WIP Plus program, and then the ARC and PLC payments, which they would have been receiving here or will be receiving at this point in time in October. So in the midst of all of that, a lot of government payments income sources to remember that those will be 2020 income and will not be items in very few instances where there'll be opportunity where any of that can be deferred to a future year for income tax purposes. And then a very unique thing that comes into some farms this year, through the CARES Act, there was a situation with the PPP loans where some farms did receive some of those loans and the opportunity where those loans might be forgiven. If a farm is in a position where that PPP loan has not been forgiven in their tax year, that instance it's like any other loan and is not taxable income, and so they need to be sure to not end up having that in their government payment accounts or some other account that would create taxable income, understanding that that is not taxable for 2020. If that loan is forgiven, there are certainly some issues that come up there that need to be considered. The circumstance or the way IRS views that at this point in time is any of those expenses that would have been deductible for which that PPP loan was used, those expenses are to not be deducted as things currently stand with the way IRS will be viewing that. So would certainly recommend them to work with a tax advisor to make sure they're handling anything surrounding a PPP loan, and particularly if they've had that PPP loan forgiven, that's being managed correctly within their records. Congress's view of how that ought to be happened is some different than what IRS is looking at that at this point in time, and they need to certainly see if Congress takes any action. But in the event they don't, a forgiven PPP loan will require some adjustment relative to the expenses on the Schedule F for that farm, and would certainly recommend, don't want to give them specific advice here on handling that, but recommend them to speak with a tax advisor and make sure they're handling those items correctly.
Are there any other changes that farmers and ranchers should be aware of?
Within things from a tax perspective, certainly there's items such as the $1,200 per person or $500 for dependent payments that were received. Those amounts will not be taxable and should not be put in as taxable income. But from a farm management standpoint, we have a year where there's many things that are, you might say, a little bit unsettled, all the way from having very low commodity prices for much of the year. Grain prices have improved quite a bit. The opportunity to consider, can I take advantage of these prices? Is there a reason I may want to take that income in this year versus deferring that income? And an opportunity that's not new this year, but is something that can help a farm bring flexibility into their year-end income planning from a tax perspective anyhow. And that's the opportunity with deferred payment contracts on grain to consider an opportunity where they may be able to pull some of those back into this year if they have a need because of something that changes between now and the end of the year. And in an election year, never know what might occur. And we often have had tax legislation passed late in the year. It's not too many years back where we had some December tax legislation changes, and even some opportunity where something could occur after the first of the year that reverts back to this year relative to the PPP loan activity or something along those lines. So building flexibility in. Here again, I would recommend they work with a tax advisor relative to this, but if they want to consider making grain sales to take advantage of some of these prices we have right now, deferring those grain sales, but then there is opportunity to potentially on a deferred contract by deferred contract basis to elect out of installment sale situation with some of those contracts and pull the income back into the current year. That can build quite a bit of flexibility into the planning for an individual producer depending on their situation. So importance to build flexibility, to know their situation, and even to look at the opportunity of maximizing their after-tax income rather than looking at this as just an opportunity to minimize the income tax paid. That can help facilitate conversations with a lender, can help facilitate taking a look at what are the goals and objectives of a individual producer or a farm family, and making decisions as they do their year-end income planning, making those decisions in a way that helps them best reach their goals for not just the immediacy of minimizing tax this year, but for the longer term and the goals and objectives that they have for their farm and for their family.
You also suggest that they start taking action now, getting all of their records together and really trying to figure out where they stand.
Yes, Jeff, that is an important step to take at this point in time. Year-end income planning is not something you want to be seeking to do next February or March after the year has ended, and the amount of flexibility that's there is very, very minimal. But also, even as you get later in the year, if there's a need, as some farms will be looking at this year, a need to potentially bring in more income to manage their income to the best position for them. If you wait too long into the year to realize that, the ability of getting grain delivered, if that needs to occur, if there's on-farm storage and such, the ability to meet those desired ends may not be able to occur if there's not too many days left in the year. And if there is a need to manage things with some additional expenses, whether those be machinery and equipment purchases, other prepayment of items, on the machinery and equipment side, the ability to go into an equipment dealer and make a decision on a year-end purchase and to deduct that expense this year as a part of that farm's expenses, as a part of either their bonus depreciation or Section 179 depreciation, they would need to actually have that piece of equipment available for use on the farm. And there may be circumstances just due to various things surrounding equipment manufacturing and even just the movement of equipment from one place to the next that might make it difficult to complete that if they wait too close to the end of the year. So taking action, getting their records in order at this point in time and preparing themselves where they have opportunity to know and understand their situation, to use their individual records, their information to make the best decisions to meet their goals and objectives, and be able to take action on those decisions before the end of year comes.
Can the Kansas Farm Management Association help in any way?
Yes, with the Kansas Farm Management Association program, we certainly do look to work very closely with our KFMA members, helping them throughout the year at working at getting their records in order, keeping those records in a way that they're prepared to use those records for decisions when those points in time come. And we will be working certainly with KFMA members here in the next several months as we approach the end of the year at helping them know and understand their situation and helping them use those records, making wise decisions for each of those individual situations.
That's Kevin Herbel, Executive Director of the Kansas Farm Management Association. To learn more about KFMA, go to agmanager.info. Agriculture Today continues after the break. This is the K-State Radio Network.
Did you know every Kansas farmer feeds 128 plus people?
Kansas farmers are hard workers, dependable, authentic, and sensitive.
Not only do farmers put food on your table, but they put clothes on your back and fuel in your car.
For more information about Kansas farmers, visit K-State Research and Extension online or stop by your local extension office. This message has been brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
Broadcasting from the campus of Kansas State University, you're listening to Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you, and now we move on to today's agricultural news headlines, courtesy in part of DTN. Well, quickly reporting on the Kansas numbers from that USDA cattle on feed report, which was released last Friday. In Kansas feedlots on October the 1st, 2.54 million cattle. That inventory was up 7% from a year ago. And placements during September totaling 490,000 head, up 13% from 2019. Fed cattle marketings for the month totaling 410,000 head. That was up 6% from last year, according to the USDA in its cattle on feed report on Friday. The Office of the U.S. Trade Representative and the USDA have issued a new report highlighting the progress made to date in implementing the agricultural provisions in the U.S.-China Phase 1 Economic and Trade Agreement. To date, China has implemented at least 50 of the 57 technical commitments under the Phase 1 agreement. China also has substantially ramped up its purchases of U.S. agricultural products. To date, China has purchased over $23 billion in agricultural products. That's approximately 71% of its target under the Phase 1 agreement. Now, highlights outlined in this report include outstanding sales of U.S. corn to China at an all-time high of 8.7 million tons, U.S. soybean sales for marketing year 2021 off to the strongest start in history, outstanding sales to China there, double 2017 levels, and U.S. exports of sorghum to China from January to August totaling $617 million. That's up from $561 million for the same period in 2017. Now, on the livestock side, says the report, U.S. pork exports to China hitting an all-time record in just the first 5 months of 2020, and U.S. beef and beef products exported to China through August already more than triple the total for 2017. In addition to these products, the USDA is expecting 2020 sales to China to hit record or near record levels for numerous other agricultural products from the U.S., including pet food, alfalfa hay, peanuts, and prepared foods. Now, USDA Secretary Sonny Perdue says that the uptick in China's purchases of U.S. agricultural products is helping support prices. Here's more from the USDA's Gary Crawford.
Agriculture Secretary Sonny Perdue says he's very optimistic about China's recent and future purchases of U.S. ag products. Under the Phase 1 agreement, China was to buy this year about $36.5 billion worth of U.S. ag products, and Perdue told reporters in Unionville, Michigan Friday,
I don't know whether or not we'll reach that strong number that we had for 2020 or not in light of the pandemic and other kind of issues like Hong Kong and those kind of things that sort of affect trade. But I can tell you, the last 2 months, they have really been stepping up, and the exports are just accelerating exponentially from beans and corn perspective, as well as other things.
Those Chinese purchases helping boost prices. Soybeans this past week approaching $11 a bushel, corn well over $4.
We hadn't seen those kind of numbers in a while.
This is Gary Crawford reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture.
Now, the USDA and the Trade Representative's office stated that they continue to work closely with the Chinese government to ensure that the Phase 1 agreement is fully implemented so that access for U.S. food and agricultural products into the Chinese market can continue to expand moving forward. Senate Agriculture Committee Ranking Member Debbie Stabenow and 14 Democrat Senate colleagues are calling on the USDA to reverse what they labeled an arbitrary decision that excludes lost meat sales by dairy producers during the pandemic as eligible for COVID-19 aid payments under the Coronavirus Food Assistance Program 2. The senators noted that losses from meat produced from breeding animals was included in CFAP 1, but not the CFAP 2 effort. That change will affect the livestock industry and will be particularly harmful to dairy producers who often operate at extremely tight margins, according to these senators. It's not clear that the urgings from the lawmakers will result in a change in the CFAP 2 effort at this stage. And the USDA's Food Safety and Inspection Service plans to gather more information about cell-based meat and poultry products before it issues labeling regulations. The agency last Thursday said that it intends to publish what's called an advanced notice of proposed rulemaking, seeking public comments to inform future labeling rules for cell-based meat and poultry products. This will help ensure that a public process allowing stakeholder comments will be used to develop those labeling regulations, according to the FSIS. The final rule for the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, as crafted under the 2018 Farm Bill, is now published in the Federal Register. Rod Bain of the USDA has more on that.
Now published in the Federal Register. the final rule for the updated USDA Environmental Quality Incentives Program.
This final rule is just really what I'd call a tweaking of the wording, but not any substantially new regulation coming through the final rule than what people actually saw in the interim final rule.
Published last December, according to Natural Resources Conservation Service Acting Chief Kevin Norton. The EQIP updates stemming from the 2018 Farm Bill include
the integration of new EQIP incentives practices. Those are similar to the Conservation Stewardship Program where we can adopt practices incrementally instead of the whole farm concept. So we'll be rolling that out this year.
As well as requiring NRCS to offer an advance payment option to historically underserved producers and expanding the EQIP-funded Conservation Innovation Grant Program to include both on-farm conservation innovation and soil health demonstration trials. Broad Bay reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
And grain producers wanted to briefly bring to your attention something that the K-State Department of Agriculture and Economics, in collaboration with the Kansas Farm Bureau, will be putting on in the months ahead, a series of Winning the Game grain marketing workshops. And there'll be 3 of those coming up quite soon, focusing on corn marketing, looking at developing pre-harvest marketing strategies for the 2021 Kansas corn crop using cost of production for price strategy targets, seasonal price trends-based pre-harvest strategies using seasonal flexibility in those 2021 corn marketing plans, and to look at the array of pre-harvest marketing tools that a producer can employ. Staging each of these workshops will be K-State's Dan O'Brien and from the Kansas Farm Bureau, Mark Nelson. Those 3 focusing on corn will be taking place Tuesday, November the 17th in Phillipsburg, Wednesday the 18th at Plains, and then Tuesday, December the 1st at Wichita. And there'll be more in the series on various grains continuing through December, January, and February. You can see all the details on these to date at agmanager.info. agmanager.info. Jeff's back with this week's 4-H segment next on Agriculture Today.
Did you eat today? Thank a farmer. A way to get more involved in agriculture is through 4-H and FFA. Through 4-H and FFA, we have been given multiple opportunities to grow as leaders and learn more about agriculture.
You can learn skills related to jobs, public speaking skills, and you get the opportunity to travel around the country and meet new people.
If you want more information about getting more involved in 4-H and FFA, visit them on their websites at kansasffa.org and kansas4h.org.
This is Agriculture Today. I'm Jeff Wickman. Several groups of Kansas 4-H youth are taking part in the Science of Agriculture Challenge November 14th in Manhattan. Dr. Andrea Arbuckle, a veterinarian certified in animal chiropractic, has been working with 5 Elk County 4-H youth, including Wyatt Fechter, on a project that involves chickens, pigs, and cattle. Andrea, first off, maybe just some background on this project and how the 4-H youth in Elk County got involved.
Well, I was actually asked to help a group from Cali County with their Science of Ag Challenge through K-State Research and Extension and Kansas 4-H in 2018. I just gave them some tips on how to design a scientific study. And then at that time, I got a little more information as to what they were doing, and I thought it would be really neat for Elk County to do something along those lines. I'm a veterinarian and a certified animal chiropractor, and I attended a training weekend. It was the first ever training weekend for livestock chiropractic and how it could be used in like production aspects instead of just the show industry. So then I gathered a group of kids and we worked together to design the study that we're doing, and the kids have been working really hard and are about ready to present their final data.
Give me a little background in terms of how they felt when you said, let's try a chiropractic project with certain animals.
Well, I'm going to let Wyatt answer that so he can tell us how he actually felt.
So first I was wondering how you would adjust livestock, because it's not exactly like a human. You can't just tell them to lay down and you can pop them any way you want to. They don't listen as the best most of the time.
Well, let's be honest, Wyatt. Did you think I was crazy?
Yes, I did.
I think that's how most people, when you say I'm going to adjust livestock, they kind of look at you like you're nuts. But I think, these kids have found some interesting stuff. Obviously, there's more work to be done, but I think they've done a good job with it.
Well, and this was wide-ranging, too, because they looked at chickens, pigs, and cattle, so they really kind of expanded across what we would really expect to see on the agricultural side.
Yeah, especially for, our focus is the food animal side for sure.
Wyatt, what were some of the things that maybe surprised you as you did this study?
How beneficial adjusting these animals could be, for how much better the meat from the chickens tasted from the adjusted group compared to the control group was one very surprising thing.
Talk a little bit about how you decided to go about the study, and I don't know if Andrea wants to tackle this or Wyatt, but you had to have the adjusted and the non-adjusted groups, but you really kind of also had to do a little bit more science as part of this.
Yeah, so what we did was we did nasopharyngeal swabs on the cattle to see what all diseases were, and to make sure we had some diseases before we did it, and we adjusted half of them.
So what about setting up our scientific study, Wyatt? For each of the groups, what was the one thing we changed?
If they were adjusted or not.
Yep. So we had our adjusted and our controlled. And like our chickens, our laying hens, and our broilers, how were they all raised?
They were all home raised.
Well, they were raised together. But where did they come from? Yeah, I think it was New Mexico. But they all hatched on the same day, and they shipped together. Everything was done identical except for we adjusted half, and then we left the other half as our control group. And that's the key point to a scientific study, is that you only change one variable. So tell us, Wyatt, a little bit about the hogs.
So with the hogs, we did an ear notch on one ear if they were adjusted and another if they weren't adjusted. And other than that, they were completely the same. They were in the same pen when they were eating and everything.
When did we adjust them?
We adjusted them when they were weaned and when they were moved to the fattening pen. So we adjusted them twice.
And that's the part of our study that's still a little ongoing, but so far they're averaging about 7 days sooner to harvest in the adjusted group. And we expect that average to increase a little bit because we have more non-adjusted or more from our control group that haven't sold yet. So that should widen a little bit. And then also tell him about our broiler chickens. You mentioned the taste test briefly. Tell him a little more about that.
Yes, so with our broilers at the fair, we had a taste test for the broilers. We had the adjusted and the non-adjusted. We fried them in.
They were outdoor fryers.
Outdoor fryers, but they were like the same fryers. We did a blind taste test, so no one knew if they were adjusted or non-adjusted. We just asked them which one they liked more, and 75% for the adjusted group, and then only 16% for the non-adjusted group, and 9% could not tell a difference. So there was definitely good difference in between the adjusted and non-adjusted.
I guess really the encouraging thing here is that all of this showed promising results.
Yeah, and even the ones that, our cattle health study, obviously nothing got sick, but we can't say whether or not the chiropractic helped, but we do know that there were plenty of pathogens present, because as Wyatt mentioned earlier, we did the nasopharyngeal swabs, and there were active pathogens. So we don't know if the chiropractic maybe helped boost the herd immunity just a little bit, but that's one that definitely needs to be explored further. And really all of these need to be repeated. Wyatt, tell them a little bit about the chicken taste test, and this is the second study of its kind, right, that found the same results?
Another group has tried this and found the same results for the broilers as we did for the taste test, so that it has been done twice so that we know it wasn't just some accident that it happened.
And the veterinarians that did this, it's actually where I did my chiropractic training, and they are publishing the kids' data alongside theirs for the broiler study, because it's really important in the scientific world when you have two independent studies that show the same results. And that's part of the reason the kids really had to spell out exactly how they were doing this, so anybody could come along, take their study and repeat it and see whether or not they could get the same results.
Wyatt, maybe in closing, how do you think that this overall experiment helped you grow in your 4-H journey?
It helped me learn a lot more about other things in agriculture. Like, I had no idea how to butcher a chicken or catch pigs before I did this. I also learned how to give presentations better. I've had to present this quite a few times
Is this something then, Andrea, that can continue even with other 4-H members down the road?
Yeah, we're hoping so. We're looking at maybe continuing it with the cattle, and then we would like to do the pigs and get some carcass data, but I don't know if that'll be a possibility. But we're also hoping that more kids in Elk County 4-H will want to pursue something similar, not necessarily this project, but something in the ag field, and maybe design a study of their own and present as well.
That's Andrea Arbuckle, a veterinarian certified in animal chiropractic. She's been working with 5 Elk County 4-H youth, including Wyatt Fechter, on a project to measure the impact of chiropractic adjustments on chickens, pigs, and cattle. The Science of Agriculture Challenge is November 14th. And that'll do it for this edition of Agriculture Today. For Eric Atkinson, I'm Jeff Wickman. This is the K-State Radio Network.